Hello, and nope. I need to turn more this way. A little bit more. I'm adjusting the camera. I apologize. Anyway, before we get into this video here, I intend to have, hopefully, my news going again, the daily news as I used to do at the end of each day, as we hit May. So, just giving you all a look forward. Before we get into that, though, with that said, let's jump into this video. We have a number of articles here. This is from The Guardian. The damage is done. Trump's tariff put the dollar's safe haven status in jeopardy. Experts say fears about unpredictable policy are creating crisis of confidence in U.S. bonds once seen as risk-free. From Australia, Australian Broadcasting Company, not ABC America. No, this is Australian Broadcast Company. Are Donald Trump's tariffs destroying America's exorbitant privilege? The severe market reaction to U.S. President Donald Trump's tariffs have raised serious questions about traders' perceptions of the U.S. And then from Jacobin, Trump has exposed the fragility of the global dollar system. What caused Donald Trump to walk back many of his tariffs last week was not domestic pressure, but a run on the market for U.S. treasuries led by institutional savers. If U.S. debt is no longer a safe asset, then American hegemony is also at risk. Because he has so undercut the value and the strength of the American dollar because he's a dumb dick. We are now in serious trouble. The American dollar's actual strength is being put in danger because of what he has done on an international stage. And these are current articles. The 11th of April, I think this one was from. Yeah, 11th of April this year. This one, I think, was 12th of April this year. And Jacobin was just a few days ago. When it was written and released. I think it said 5, but yeah. So we have all this notice going on. It isn't by chance. President Dumbdick has completely undercut the value of the American dollar on an international stage. This even puts into question that I have. Many people talked about we were in strength per modern monetary theory because our dollar was seen as the stable fucking asset. And thus we could really do whatever the fuck we wanted because we had the stable asset. But dumbass, President Dumb Dick, has destroyed that. So this is not even counting the violations of human rights with the deportations he's doing. We're just looking at this on an economic level. And yeah, he's screwing everybody over. Now we have a video from The Economist. Has Trump damaged the dollar? Let's do some watching of this.
The thing about reserve currencies is part of what makes them safe is that everyone else thinks they're safe. You have, I think, a financial crisis in transition, and then you end up in a not a world where you can't park your assets anywhere, but a less secure and stable one.
Henry.
Yeah. Think about this. So many nations in the world used the American dollar as its backup currency. It's what gave us so much strength and power on an economic level. And of course, President Dumb Dick goes and fucks that up. But let's continue.
For all of the upheaval of the past couple of weeks, the on-again, off-again tariffs and so on, that's not the only thing that's troubled you in this time.
No, the tariffs aren't the only thing. It's also the financial market reaction, which seems to be beyond a stock market sell-off. It looks like a generalized turn away from American assets by investors, which could, perhaps if it continues and gets worse, result in a threat to the dollar's status as the world's reserve currency, which is the status on which the global financial system is built and on which a lot of the global economy relies.
What's happening?
Yeah. What he has done, his economic policies are not just fucking over America. They're hurting a lot of other countries. They're the reason Japan and South Korea has turned to what were once seen as ambiguous neighbors in China. Because we've become so fucking unstable with Dumb Dick in office.
Happening now that's giving you that fear?
Since President Trump announced the so-called reciprocal tariffs at the start of April, there have been big falls in equity markets. Everyone knows about that. The more alarming signal that's happened is this simultaneous sell-off in bonds and in the dollar. So normally what happens when bond yields go up is that the dollar goes up too, because investors can get more by buying the dollar and holding those bonds. When your bond yields go up but the dollar goes down, it means that there's this generalized sell-off, a flight from those assets, which suggests investors are somewhat fearful. It's the kind of dynamic you see more in emerging markets. It's the kind of dynamic you saw in Britain after the disastrous mini-budget under Liz Truss's premiership. And that's what's sending this signal that maybe there's this risk premium now on US assets.
Yeah. He is putting us in severe danger for his own personal stake. And many people can go, look, well, this is part of his project to make America better. No. No. No, it isn't. It's to make himself and his rich buddies richer. You can do the track and it shows that's what's happening.
And it's that's worrying. And what's also going on at the same time as the trade war is that Congress is preparing to loosen the purse strings as it renews the Trump tax cuts from the first term and potentially tries to add to them. And it's passed this budget framework, which is very aggressive in terms of the fiscal loosening that could go on. Potentially more than the Trump tax cuts, the COVID stimulus and Biden stimulus combined, according to the Committee for a Responsible Federal Budget. So this big fiscal loosening is also enough to catch the attention of bond markets and dollar investors, I think.
But surely these early signs are evident to also the Trump administration, to economic advisors in the administration, right?
So clearly the administration will be watching the financial markets, and they have proved responsive already this month, turning around on some of the tariffs in response to what's going on. But what's pretty remarkable is that you have senior figures in the administration who aren't that keen on the dollar's reserve currency status. They've made Stephen Moran, who is the chairman of the Council of Economic Advisors, has made this argument that the strong dollar is a tax on manufacturing workers because it makes US exports more expensive. J.D. Vance has said that.
Simply put, Americans feel they should be deserve to be paid a decent wage, and thus anything they make is going to be more expensive, and thus, we need to weaken the power of that dollar. This is how Trump's billionaire buddies think.
In the past as well. So there is this idea out there in MAGA circles that the reserve currency status is something that brings big costs. There were a lot of rumors flying in financial markets earlier this year about this so-called Mar-a-Lago Accord, which was based on something that Steve Moran had written before he joined the administration. That's been left to the side now, but he did give this updated analysis in a speech recently, which entertained ideas such as asking foreigners to pay checks to the US government in order to pay for the services the US was providing to the world, which includes the provision of the reserve currency. And saying these kind of things in public is a pretty bold thing to do because for decades, the US government has been careful to say that it welcomes a strong dollar, that it is a safe harbor for international investors. But now the administration itself has actually cast a bit of doubt on that.
And seems to be fairly untroubled by the kerfuffle that has raised. But let's get...
Yeah, think about this. He is putting us in such danger. Breaking the law as per constitutional amendment to detain and deport people without due process. A guaranteed right in the Fifth Amendment. People born in this country are American as per the 14th Amendment. He don't care about the Constitution. He don't care about the law. And economically, he wants the average American underwater so they can put more money in the pockets of the rich, of the wealthy. This is who so many people voted for. That I yelled at the top of my lungs, he's not good. People like, nope, I like him. But anyway.
Game this out. Suppose the incipient signs that we see now pick up and this goes in the nightmare scenario. What happens? How does it play out?
So I think the first thing that happens is that bond yields continue to rise as foreigners who own US treasuries, so foreigners own, I think, $8.5 trillion of US treasuries, most of whom, by the way, are private sector investors, with whom the Trump administration...
Just quick notice, there's a reason I tell you, educate thy damn self, Fox News. Newsmax, all these right-wing goddamn fucking news sources, so-called news, they're not fucking dependable. They're not real news. They're bullshit. They've always been bullshit. But anyway.
Couldn't negotiate in a diplomatic fashion. If those investors start offloading bonds, bond yields go up. Now that very quickly feeds back into America's budget because America has a lot of debt. Its debts are worth about 100% of its GDP. So you can think about it as a 1 percentage point increase in bond yields, and the interest costs you have to pay eventually lead to you have to find an additional 1% of GDP in taxes or spending cuts in order to pay those interest costs. So that loop starts turning, and eventually that would force Congress to act in order to steady the ship. And it would be something comparable perhaps to what happened in the global financial crisis, where Congress had to very quickly pass measures to stabilize the financial system. They would have to do the same to try and stabilize the bond market. But the question is, can America's political system, with all the stress it's under, cope with that? Would it be capable of correcting the fiscal picture rapidly with the rapid negotiations that would require? Would it be able to, if necessary, find a 2/3 majority in Congress to potentially override a presidential veto if President Trump didn't like the kind of cuts to Social Security and so on that would be necessary? Because it's a big adjustment. The US is going into this position having exploited its status as the reserve currency to a great extent. It's run up those high debts, but it's also been running a deficit of 7% of GDP, which is a pretty extraordinary deficit to run when the economy's strong. That's the kind of deficit you usually see in an economic crisis. So it's starting from this position where the budget's way out of whack. It's destabilizing things further, and that just means that the course correction's pretty large and would be a big political lift in that moment of crisis if it came about.
And it
Yeah. The man's such a shitbag. I don't even like to call him a man. The shitbag is a bad shitbag. President Dumbdick has fucked us all. And of course, he and his buddies think the best thing to do is force Americans to have to take pay cuts and deal with things. No, the best thing to do is to tax your asses. Tax the billionaires and millionaires. But that's seen as too radical. That's what needs to fucking happen! Instead, we're all having to bend over and take it. Because so many people were too goddamn stupid. You know, the founding fathers, I ain't saying commit violence, but they wouldn't have put up with this shit. They would have gotten their muskets, they would have got their rifles, and they would have marched. There's a reason. Even under Washington's term, there was something called the fucking Whiskey Rebellion. Even on the newly made country, they were like, look, we're not getting paid like we're supposed to, like we were promised. And yeah, we're going to push back. But instead, we're like, oh, civility, you have to be civil. Fuck your goddamn civility. This is where it's gotten us. Fuck your civility! Don't do violence, but God damn it, it's time to be loud. It's time to yell at the top of your lungs.
It sounds as if it came about, it's not even clear that the administration, that Congress could pull it together to stop the slide. Maybe doesn't want to stop the slide.
Well, I think they'd want to stop the slide. The question is, can the American political system reach that kind of compromise in its current condition, given what's happened in terms of polarization, given the Trump administration's attitude to the economy? I think there's lots of question marks there. And the other thing that would need to happen is that the Federal Reserve would be wanting to intervene to stabilize things in the bond markets, almost certainly. But it's one thing to do that in the global financial crisis when there's no real inflationary danger. But the other thing that's going on at the moment, in part because of tariffs, is that inflation is rising. Consumers' inflation expectations have shot up. And there's been pressure on the Fed from the Trump administration. President Trump would like them to lower interest rates. He gets to appoint a new Fed chairman next year, or at least nominate a new Fed chairman to replace Jerome Powell. And there's also this court case making its way through the system, which might reduce the protections eventually afforded to Fed governors. That they're protected from being fired at the moment, but this court case provides an opportunity for the courts to weaken those protections. It's quite unlikely, but it's an unhelpful risk to have hanging there. So you have the Fed that's in this somewhat compromised position, and would, as well as wanting to stop any bond market crisis if one happened, would be desperate not to give the impression that it was bailing out Congress and financing this big deficit when the bond markets wouldn't. So it would not be, I think, fully able to calm global financial markets in the way it normally would until Congress had righted the fiscal ship, which, as I say, might be politically difficult.
Okay.
Yeah, especially with considering fucking Congress right now is so, well, the Republican half is so beholden to Trump, they want to kiss his ball sack and suck it instead of growing a pair of their own and say, look, we need to do what's right. But instead, they're out there kissing Trump's ass, sucking him off, because they only care. Because, his people might push back. Well, maybe you should do the right goddamn thing and go a goddamn pair yourself and say, no, he's a fucking goddamn idiot. This is what we need to do. You should have the power of the purse, but you're willing to give it to him because you're stupid, fucking scared little shits. Fuck goddamn Republicans. Fuck the goddamn Democrats. Fuck them both. They've got us in this fucking situation.
Okay, you've painted a potentially very grim picture. Let's keep gaming it out. Suppose then the run on the dollar happens, the dollar stops being the world's reserve currency. What could take its place? Who are the contenders for a replacement, or are there any?
Well, the really interesting thing is that over the past few decades when people have debated this, the question has always been, will the Chinese RMB displace the dollar as the world's reserve currency? That's the question people like to entertain. That's, in my view, always been quite unlikely given the state of the Chinese economy, given the capital controls in place in China, given the fact that it doesn't have the rule of law. The Chinese Communist Party prefers the phrase rule by law. So it does not have the confidence of investors or the legal setup necessary to take over reserve currency status, and it's embroiled in the trade war. It's taking a big blow from these tariffs. What you do have, though, is you have lots of alternatives to the dollar, none of which provides the same degree of safety and liquidity and size of economy that America can offer, but provides some of those things in some combination. So you've got the euro, which obviously has a big economy behind it, but doesn't have as deep capital markets and doesn't have many jointly issued assets equivalent to US treasuries. There are some, but there aren't that many. It's more at the national level. You have the Nordic countries. They're perceived as pretty stable, but they're obviously very small. You have Japan. It has big debts of its own, and there are some question marks there. You have Switzerland, also small. Then you have non-sovereign assets. You have gold, which is a traditional haven, and you have maybe cryptocurrency. But you are looking at a world, I think, where people are seeking out what the reserve asset is going to be, and nobody's quite sure. So it's not that you don't have alternatives, but you don't have this focal point that you currently have on the dollar. And that's potentially quite unhelpful and an unstable world, because the thing about reserve currencies is part of what makes them safe is that everyone else thinks they're safe. And
so think about this. Economic destabilization, but it's only because the American dollar has such an economic driving force behind it, and it's been in place so long that it may be able to weather the storm. But right now, he is completely destabilizing the power of that dollar, because he's a dumb shit.
So there's this clustering effect. And that also means that if you live in a world where there are lots of options and nobody's quite sure, it's a world that's more prone to runs and destabilizing events, movements from one currency to another, and so on. So that's a loss for the world economy, which operates on a global financial system that's premised on the idea that everything's going to revolve around the US dollar, and that the US dollar and US Treasury securities are rock solid. So you have, I think, a financial crisis in transition, and then you end up in not a world where you can't park your assets anywhere, but a less secure and stable one.
So we've been talking about this as the place that we might end up if things go in that kind of mechanistic way you describe. But I wonder if the whole system, as you say, is predicated on the sort of trust in the system, on the certainty that this and that won't happen. Is the damage already done? If the administration walks things back, makes fiscal corrections, calms everyone's nerves, is some of the damage already done because investors can no longer be sure that this kind of tumult isn't just around the corner all the time?
So I think the dollar's position is so strong, its dominance of trade, its dominance of derivatives trading, of currency trading, of central bank holdings across the board, that if the Trump administration pursued a sort of stabilization agenda and rolled back the trade war, and there was a fiscal correction in Congress, that the dollar's position would be secure in the short term. I do think that they have now cast doubt on things to a degree that it wouldn't be quite as secure as it was a month ago, and that risk, perhaps a small risk premium even on the debt and the dollar, is always going to be there. So I think there's a permanent cost that's been incurred here, but we're not in the crisis yet. There's definitely the opportunity to correct course here still.
Henry, thanks very much for your time.
Thanks, Jason.
Well, I had pause there, but yeah. So, while the dollar is still strong enough to weather this, and he could stabilize things, I don't think he will. Because again, evidence shows he's not really into stabilizing things. He's all about making another profit for himself, his family, and his rich buddies. That's all he cares about. He don't care about doing what's right. And yeah, we're fucked as a nation. And economic systems are going to be on such an unstable status that unless Congress grows a fucking pair, we're fucked. This is going to be some long-term damage. And people, get ready, because it's not going to get any better. You elected a fucking moron. But we'll go ahead and end this episode here. As always, educate thyself. Think, read, study, learn. Someone tells you something you have trouble believing. Ask them to cite their sources. I'll be putting my links and sources in the description box below the video. Thank you all for watching. I'll see you all in the next one. Until then, later.